What's happening, everybody? I'm Steve, and welcome back to Junkdrummer TV. If you will notice, I am in my new house. I'm not in my new studio yet. That's still about a couple weeks away. But today's video is kind of atypical. It is my appearance on the Rush Discush Podcast with Adam and usually Julianne, but she didn't join him for this appearance. And the way this podcast works is he gives musicians and other just Rush fans two songs to compare and contrast, and he gave me some good stuff to do. This is almost an hour discussion of comparing YYZ with Leave That Thing Alone. It was a lot of fun. Adam, if you're watching this, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for letting me use the content on my channel. I will link in the description to their podcast. They have more than a couple episodes up, and again, set up the way that I did my podcast. They take two songs and they compare and contrast and try to figure out which one's better or which one you like better, right? So I had a whole lot of fun. This is a long podcast. Strap in because there is Rush nerdery ahead, and it was so much fun to do. I hope y'all enjoy it.
Welcome back, guys. We've got Steve, Junkdrummer TV, back with us, and we are going to be diving deep into a couple of these instrumental tracks, YYZ and Leave That Thing Alone to be particular. Just some stuff about these tracks. They are, YYZ is like the most famous instrumental. If you ask some random passerby on the street, they'll probably know it. Leave That Thing Alone, I think, is criminally underrated by the masses.
Big time.
Yeah.
Before we get into it, Adam, I would like to give mad respect to you and your wife for daring to do commentary on Rush. Oh my goodness, you better stay anonymous. Because if you, and I know because I've listened to some of your episodes already, and I know that you are big fans, but man, take it from a guy who's done 2 or 3 Neil Peart videos. Like, if you don't like them in the way that they want you to like them, they're going to give you hell. They are the most discerning and possibly psychotic fan base that we're both, of course, part of. But mad respect, man. That is so ballsy for you all to be like, I'm going to put my comments out there about Rush.
I mean, I don't care. They can come at me all day. Like I've said in a couple of the episodes, like, this is our opinion. You guys probably hate it, so stop listening if you do. But and we've had a guy reach out and he's like, well, you picked wrong this time, but I'll keep listening.
You got it wrong. Dude, I'm in a band that's named after one of their records, and I still get hell because I'll say, it's maddening to deal with. They are a hard fan base. Come on, man. We're all Rush nerds. Let's be Rush nerds together. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're like manga fans.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you can be a fan of something, but also recognize that other people have things to contribute in this world that are sometimes better.
Right. Yeah. So man, you all are just brave, very brave.
Well, thank you.
But yeah, so I got 2 great instrumentals, and as you said with YYZ, it's kind of like it's got to be the most famous. Like, I was thinking about this, and I talked to a buddy of mine about it. Like, if you're talking about like famous instrumentals, you could say Jessica by the Allman Brothers. Yeah. You could say White Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson. If you're a Frank Zappa freak, you could say King Kong. But like YYZ is the instrumental. And when you gave me this task, I didn't really need to listen to YYZ because it's YYZ. You just listen to any classic rock station. It's going to come on within a few hours. But I hadn't went back and listened to Counterparts in so long. And Counterparts, for me, because I'm 44, it was the first record that was mine, because when I discovered Rush, it was around the Presto era, and then I went backwards, of course, and then Roll the Bones was already out, because that's 91, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Counterparts was like the record where I was like, "Oh, I'm waiting. This is the record I'm waiting for." And I got to go to the mall and go to the disc jockey and buy Counterparts on cassette tape and listening to it in my brown S10 on the way back home. And that record is maybe the best engineered Rush record. They're all great. Rush fans, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I offended you with that comment, but it sounds so good. It's from an engineering standpoint, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and as a fellow engineer, that I totally agree with you. Like moving pictures, it's got a nice crisp sound. Like it sounds very polished in some spots. Like the studio is very, very present in that. But then I think because they were kind of, they had their synth phase and they had their let's return to our roots kind of deal. They really nailed all of that on Counterparts, and that's where I think the engineering just really makes them shine. And then they kind of, I don't think they completely lost it in the future ones, but I think there was just something magic that happened on that album.
It was recorded at La Studio. The engineer was a guy they called Caveman or something like that. Somebody in the comment section tell us. I couldn't believe, and when you go listen to those back to back, you're hearing top quality recording technology of its time. Like, and it's not even close from a fidelity standpoint. YYZ doesn't have the same clarity of fidelity as Counterparts, but that's because it had 20 some years of roughly 15 years of recording technology between the two, you know what I mean? And that was one of the biggest things. And I don't, it's my task to say which one I think is best or convince you which one is best. How are we doing this?
No. So what we want from you is more fuel for us to get into it and really figure out for ourselves which we'd have to pick. Obviously, we'll still ask you for which one you would pick if you had to only pick one to still exist. But what we're super interested in is what's going on rhythmically, what's going on with the drums. For people who don't have any idea of musically what's going on, just so that we can better appreciate what's going on with these tracks.
Okay, so let's start with Leave That Thing Alone, and we'll let YYZ be the main event. Excuse me. Leave That Thing Alone is a fantastic instrumental, and it has maybe the best Doctor Who melody that's ever been recorded that wasn't the Doctor Who melody. That B section sounds like Doctor Who to me. It does. It starts with that, kind of faux funk. It almost sounds like it was recorded on a Stratocaster, but I'm almost for certain that's not true. What you see in Leave That Thing Alone is something that Neil does better than any drummer. Is he does a concept that is as old as Johann Sebastian Bach, and that is theme and variation. When that A section comes back, I think that A section happens 3 times, or the B section, the Doctor Who part. The Doctor Who part happens 3 or 4 times. Every time it happens, he's adding to it. The first B section, the first Doctor Who section is kind of more straight ahead. The second time he does the Doctor Who section, it's more of a tom thing, and he adds a lot of electronic triggers, and it may even be on electronic, but he did a lot of had small trigger pads on his acoustic set, and that tom tribal, always called tom grooves, tribal grooves. That tribal groove that he plays on the second Doctor Who section is so melodic, something that drummers, I think, forget, and a lot of people that aren't drummers don't think about, is drums can be just as melodic, even though we are just making noise. We are noise organizers, right? And we don't really except unless you're Danny Carey, tune to a pitch, right? We just tune the toms till they sound good, and then hopefully it sets well in the mix, and if it doesn't, you retune. But you can be so melodic. If you've ever heard the jazz tune, the drums also waltzes, right? The drum also waltzes by Max Roach. That's a melodic drum solo. Well, that section in the second Doctor Who section is just so, it's a hook. That drum part is a hook. Like, people forget that, like, you think, oh, what's a hook? A guitar player plays the hook. No, man, the drums can too. And this song, and I want to talk about with theme and variation, each time he goes through each one of those sections, I think there's 4 or 5 sections if you also include that like faux jazz part. Every time that part comes back around, he's adding to it. There's more hi-hat openings the second time, or there's more bass drum notes the second time. So I think that those are the subconscious things that we like, that even if you're not a musician and you don't know the nuts and bolts of what's going on, I think those are the things that we like. We like that. It's like almost like a subliminal trick that we're playing on the listener. And Neil does it to perfection on Leave That Thing Alone. I forgot, because, man, I wore this record out in 1993, man. Because, again, it was like new Rush, because I'd already like digested everything else. Oh, yeah. And new Rush, and then what's the song that's right after that? I've been listening to it. Oh man, I'm going to mess this up here. The song right after Leave That Thing Alone is an amazing record as well. Cold Fire, maybe? Is that what it is? I think maybe that's it. Yeah. But that whole record is just so great. But Leave That Thing Alone, I think, is a masterpiece. It is a clinic on, and I think, we talked about this on our other segment with Jim Brennan.
Yeah, Jim Brennan.
Benner. We were close. We were talking about, what I think about with Neil is he's the greatest composer of drums. And if you listen to the last episode with me on it, you would have already heard this whole spiel. He's the Mozart. He's the Franz Liszt of drums. He orchestrates the drums better than any drum set player ever. And I think I've kind of got a reputation on my channel as someone who rails against unnecessarily overly complicated progressive rock music. Mm-hmm. Like, Prog has now reached a level of almost, we were talking about this offline, it's almost like robot singularity music. It's so complicated and so over the top and so show-offy that composition gets lost and melody is lost and harmony is lost. Rush is the greatest progressive rock band ever, in my opinion. And I love a lot of other progressive rock music. I like the very first Dream Theater record. Well, Images and Words. There's some other ones I can't think of right now. But Rush is the pinnacle of it because they are a prog band. But if you know anything about them, man, they like Cream. They like Led Zeppelin. They're a rock band. They're a rock band that's just really good at their instrument, right? And Leave That Thing Alone is just a great example of theme and variation. Go listen to that and be real mindful of how his drum parts change. And there's such a good lesson in there. If you're like, I'm a drum teacher in my real life, so I'm always trying to find knowledge. I want to find how to get better and level up, if you will. And there's so much in that song that if you could integrate it into your playing, you will definitely level up. That's what I think about Leave That Thing Alone. I think it's just a masterpiece. And I was thinking about this too. Any of their instrumentals besides YYZ and La Via Strangiato are like prisoners to those songs, because they're never going to get over as big as YYZ and La Via Strangiato, right? Those are the pinnacle of Rush instrumentals, so they get left behind. They get lost in the shuffle, right? Leave That Thing Alone, man. I would much rather at this point, because YYZ's so played out, I'd love to put on, Rock 108 or whatever, and here Leave That Thing Alone instead of YYZ. I think a lot of classic rock songs need to be retired for a little
Oh,
while.
for sure.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like, like
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin, you hear like the same 8 Led Zeppelin songs. Let's retire those and let's hear the crunge once on the
Yeah.
radio. You know what I mean? Like, as much as I love Tom Sawyer, let's not do Tom Sawyer anymore. Let's hear
Yeah.
let's hear By Tour and the Snow Dog once in a
Oh,
while
for
on like
sure.
classic rock radio.
Yeah.
So that's what I think about how Leave That Thing Alone is not ever going to get its just due, because YYZ is just this monolith that is always, every Rush instrumental was going to have to compete against that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think what makes Leave That Thing Alone, at least to me, so much more interesting than YYZ is because the melodies are so simple, but they get passed around. Like who's in charge of this simple melody, and then like you brought up the theme and the variations, just these subtle changes that you keep listening, and even though nothing melodically is changing all that much, you're like, there's something different, and I can't put my finger on it. And then it just by the time that it finishes, you're like, wait, that's it? Like,
Yeah.
we're done now?
And you brought that's a really good point. Like that A section, which is just that one chord kind of jam. That's the Geddy Lee section. Alex is kind of playing the bass part. He's playing just that whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, Geddy is driving the melody there, and then it switches to the Doctor Who part. And then Alex, then you see Geddy become the bass player again, and then Alex is that the melody, the heart of that melody right there. And they switch back and forth like that. And it's so interesting. It's such thoughtful, and I'm going to say this word a lot in this podcast. It's such thoughtful composition. You can tell that Rush, more than any other like progressive rock band, made sure that at the bottom line of what they were doing, it was still a good song.
Yeah.
They weren't just doing something because it's hard or difficult and trying to get on the cover of their respective instruments magazines. You can sing that Doctor Who part. You sing that all day. And like what you said, like, the simpleness of it, it's beautiful. I've listened to that song since you contacted with me. I've listened to it 25 times, and it's just, all those parts is just wonderful. And to get real nerdy, just from the production standpoint, it's so clear. The bass drum is just banging. That snare drum. It's the best Neil Peart snare drum sound. I think it's the pinnacle of that. If that is indeed the Radio King that he recorded with on, like, I'm pretty sure, if I've got a buddy that works for Rush and he could tell me for sure that, every Rush track, I'm pretty sure. Comment section, go ahead, tell me I'm an idiot. was a Slingerland Radio King snare drum. And if that's the one, like if you think about, that's the same snare drum that's on, and this will just maybe transition us from YYZ to Leave That Thing Alone. Oh man, if you could get a snare drum sound like that, you got to pay that engineer a lot of money. You got to make sure he comes back for the next record if you can get that sound.
Oh man, amen to that. Because I mean, it's just the typical audio engineer joke, but that your snare is never going to sound good. But there's kind of a lot of truth to that.
Dude, it's impossible, man. It's such an impossible task to get a good snare drum sound. It's really, I think it's easy to get a bass drum sound. I mean, hell, there's tracks where like people are using like a suitcase for a bass drum and it sounds okay. You know what I mean? But there's just something about that snare drum that's hard to do. So I guess that would would that transition us to, the monolith that is YYZ?
Yeah, unless there's something.
What else? What do you think, Adam? Like, what do you think about Leave That Thing Alone?
I mean, I think we hit on a lot of the things that because I agree with you on pretty much everything you said. It's just such a groove to me, and just the way that Geddy attacks that bass and like reminds you this is what a bass can do, but without going over the top with it, because. I think, like you were talking about, a lot of prog rock gets too caught up in showing off. Like these are some cool sounds that we can do, and and I think it's the difference between like Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 and some of the newer symphonic works in the classical sphere. Like now it's like there's some really cool sounds coming out, there's some really dense material, but there's not really a relatable melody that you can sing along to and that gets stuck in your head. And I think Leave That Thing Alone is a perfect example of letting simplicity shine and then supporting it through complexity.
Mhm.
And when you have that blend, you're left with something that's just an epic ride, which, you know, that entire song to me is just, if it's coming on, I'm always going to turn it up, and I'm always just going to tune out everything else just because it just pulls you in.
And you brought it up again with Geddy. Like, this is like Geddy's shine. You know, he has that whole bass solo that goes into that like kind of faux jazz thing. It's just, you know, when you think about YYZ, you think about, you know, they do trade, they do their solo trades, but like, you know, those are Neil's drum fills, you know, those are Neil's drums fills, right? And like Geddy's just kind of playing some bass. Now you're going to get bass players on here and say the complete opposite of what I just said, right? You know, drum centric nerds. But yeah, getting to hear Geddy like stretch out like that, and you know what you're hearing is like Geddy's like, I can play a little more because I don't have to sing and play this at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, that's something people don't think about. Like, playing guitar and singing is relatively easy if you're competent at both of those things. Playing bass and singing is hard because you're playing contrapuntal melodies at the same time. I'm a half-ass bass guitar player, and I can strum and sing at the same time, but I'm not playing a melodic line. You know what I mean? Like that singing and playing bass at the same time is the most. Secondary drums is the second hardest thing to do because you've got like 5 limbs. You got to keep all 4 of these things in time and coordinated and sing in time, you know, and sing in tune, hopefully. But playing bass and singing at the same time is it's impossible. Because again, you're singing a melody and playing a melody, and they're not the same. You know, when you're strumming a guitar, that guitar is the chord, and you're singing that C and singing that D. That's different, man. It's so hard. That's one of the. I was wondering about this. Do you think? But you're a bass player, so you're probably not going to think this. Do Geddy and Alex not get their due because of Neil?
Ooh, I think. Because I think Geddy has gotten a lot more than Alex as well, but I think
Alex is the forgotten one for sure.
Yeah, but I think definitely Rush, you know, Neil Peart is always going to be the first one to come up, and I think because he was so skilled at what he did, and he was a drummer and the lyricist. So one, the fact, like you we're bringing up in the previous interview, the fact that people even know the drummer's name, that's a big deal. And then the fact that he was the lyricist, and so he brought so much to the table. And then, you know, by the time you get to Geddy, it's like, well, yeah, he was the front man and he sang. And so then, well, what did Alex do? Oh, he only played guitar.
Yeah, he only wrote wrote the riffs to, you know, all those songs. And you know what? I think Alex kind of knows that too. I think he kind of knows that he's like the third guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's so insane, and they're so iconic. You know, like you could just see their silhouette and know exactly who you're looking at, and probably know what era of the band it is. You know, like if you see some like silhouette of kimonos, you know we're talking about late 70s Rush, right? There's just one of the most very few bands from top to bottom are that iconic. You know, you can think Rolling Stones. 3 of those guys are iconic: Charlie, Mick, Keith. Led Zeppelin, all 4 are iconic. I'm trying to think of other ones, you know. I mean, that's Rush. All 3 are just icon Mount Rushmore guys. It's impossible. Their success is impossible because there's no A&R guy behind a big ass oak desk somewhere in Hollywood saying, bring me 3 nerdy Canadians that write 35-minute songs about Ayn Rand, and I'm going to make $1 billion with that. That's never been a thing. No one has ever put that together, you know. Their success is impossible, and it's beautiful that they as artists got to do exactly what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, if you know anything about them, they didn't have any executive up there behind saying we need a hit. I mean, they probably did, but it didn't matter. And they just became so big that they just do whatever they wanted to. It's impossible in the music industry if you think about it. You know, especially now with everything so homogenized out in the world. You know, Rush could never happen again. Like if Rush started right now, if you took those early 20-year-old dudes and make them in 2021, they might be a cult band. You know, they might be able to like fill up a theater, like open for Periphery. You know what I mean? But like they wouldn't ever get to what they did. It's impossible. They're an impossible band.
Yeah, because now it's so focused now, just, you know, make sure it's short, digestible for TikTok, make sure that people know your YouTube, make sure they go to your Spotify, make sure that you're just always constantly marketing through your music.
Does your drummer even Twitch, man?
And it's like, I mean, these were guys that, like you said, they just did what they wanted to do. They didn't have to appeal to any authority because they were the authority. And then, you know, they didn't care if they got the critical accolades. They didn't care if people were going out and buying their records just, you know, because they just had these incredible hits. And I think that's what makes YYZ and All of Moving Pictures so interesting, is that for that one album, they happened to just coincide with what was mainstream at that one time. And then it just, you know, created that weird dynamic of people who that's the album that they discovered Rush on, and that's why they came. And then they start going to the other stuff and they're like, why did this band desert me? It's like, well, you're kind of missing. You're missing their trajectory.
In that documentary, when all those cats who I love, like Zakk Wylde,
oh yeah,
specifically, I think it was Zakk and maybe Tim from Rage Against the Machine, where they were like, "Oh, you know, my favorite bass players like playing keyboards. Man, that song's great. What are you talking about? Like, dude, Signals is a great record.
Oh my god,
you know what I mean? Yes. Like Grace Under Pressure is a great record. Like." And something that they did which is what progressive music is they co-opted all of these styles. You know, we know for a fact that Neil was a big Stuart Copeland fan. And in that era, it's there, you know, that you hear that influence, you know, like the reggae breakdown of, was written on the pedal wall.
Spirit of Radio.
Yeah, like, dude, that's they were always progressing, and that's what progressive rock is supposed to be. What progressive rock is not having the rule of, well, we're a rock band, well, we're a blues band, we're a jazz band. You're supposed to take all of the great styles that have happened in popular music and exploit them for your artistic advantages. And that's what Rush did the whole time. So even, man, I love Grace Under Pressure. That record's amazing. Red Sector A is phenomenal. Yes. And it's there listening to the music of that time. And the music of that time was like new wave. And they integrated it and they used it. And they used it to great effect. Those people who like, you know, oh, they're never the same after Permanent Waves or whatever. I can't deal with it, man. Like they're, you know, look, you know, you all did, what was the episode y'all did about the one song about walking the steps in China?
Oh, Taishan.
Whoo, yeah. You know, that's not a great song. It's not. They all can't be gems, but it wasn't like they stunk up a whole record. It never happened. It never happened. They were so consistent from the beginning and made a great record without Neil. The very first record is great. You know what I mean? Like they never, and they did what progressive rock for me is supposed to do, which is take all these disparate styles and put them in. It's what America is supposed to be, even though they're Canadian. You know, you take all of these styles and cultures and put them, and they always did it with respect and honor. You know what I mean? It's what progressive music is supposed to be, right? That's what, for me anyway. Like, if you think about Yes was more classical side, right? You know, they had Rick Wakeman and they had Steve Howe. So, you know, it was like if Bach had a rock band, you know what I mean? But like Rush, man, like you think like Mystic Rhythms, like that's him paying respect to the Dark Continent, right? Because we know that he visited there. Have you ever heard the story? It's in a Modern Drummer magazine. It was one of Neil's. It's in the 90s, I know, because that's when I was a heavy Modern Drummer reader, where he's like just, you know, riding across Africa and he ends up in like a village and there's like a drum jam going on and they don't know who he is. It's just some big tall Canadian. And he sits down and starts jamming. And, you know, one of the tribesmen or whatever villagers asked him, you know, in English, you know, how do you know how to do this? And Neil just says, nah, I'm in the business. That's one of my favorite Neil Peart video or Neil Peart stories, right? It's everything that progressive rock is supposed to be. So now, like, if we want to go to YYZ is Neil at his most Neilist. Yeah. It's peak Neil. Everything that you want when you think of like drum god, cover of Modern Drummer magazine, probably the man who has sold more drum sets outside of Ringo Starr and John Bonham. It's Neil at his most Neilist, right? It's just, man, I'm relevant enough to break down, leave that thing alone. But I don't know, like, how am I supposed to break down this iconic instrumental, right? It's YYZ. Like the answer should be like, do you like YYZ? And the answer should be like, yeah, it's YYZ. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just YYZ. But it's everything like that. That has more of your, when you think of like Neil at his like roundhouse drum fills and there's some theme and variation in that. Because there's theme and variation in every Neil track, but that one, when you think about those iconic drum fills, I'm going to get technical real quick. The drum fill, one of the things that he does that I preach to my students that a lot of drummers don't do is that when they do a drum fill, we think drum fill, crash at the end. But let's go back and listen to those drum fills. He's interspersing crashes in the middle of his drum fill. So like, you know, he uses, and it's another like classical idea, resolution points. So like, you know, like maybe the resolution point, Beato, is going to be like the crash on the E of 3 and then a crash on the 1. So that's not exactly what's going on in that song, but like, you know, 1 in 2 in the right? You don't see a lot of drummers do that. It's a way to spice your drum fills up. It's so, and I'm getting in drum teacher mode. Sorry. It's easy to like when you go into your drum fills, you think drum fill, exclamation point with the crash symbol. But one of the things that he did so wonderfully is intersperse splashes and splashes a lot of times in his drum fills. And there's a lot of that going on in YYZ. You know, it starts in 5/4, right? The first thing I think is in 5/4, which is that supposed to be Morse code for?
Yeah, that's for YYZ because that's the Toronto airport.
Okay. Dude, they're just the most Canadian band ever. I love Canadians. Canadians can drink. Have you ever drank with Canadians?
No, but
they're superhuman.
I imagine
it's superhuman
with all the cold up there.
It's superhuman, dude. It's crazy. But it's so Canadian because Canadians are so just love Canada so much. If you have any Canadian friends, they're just Captain Canada is what Rush should be. I mean, dude, they did the theme song to Hockey Night in America. Well, Neil did, right? Like, what other drummer would like? Could you imagine a drummer like doing the theme song for like Monday Night Football? No. Maybe Dave Grohl. They might get Dave Grohl to do it. Maybe, right? Maybe Travis Barker, possibly. But YYZ, you know, starts out 5/4. Those snare drum fills that go with the bass part, very rudimental. There's flams and accents in there. It's that track is if you wanted to like have the essence of what Neil was at that time. So we're like 81, right? They've recorded 4 or 5 records up to that point. If you watch that documentary, they all said that Moving Pictures was the pinnacle. They had reached the pinnacle. Like everything else was almost like a dress rehearsal for this record that put them in the zeitgeist and solidified them there forever, ever. Like until this world's done, people are going to listen to Rush, right? They're never going to go away. It's impossible. It can't. I've been teaching for 23 years, so I've probably taught through like 2.5 generations, and every generation of kids that I've taught are still coming in with Rush t-shirts on, are still coming in and want to know how to play those drum fills in YYZ. YYZ is so iconic. To use that word a lot too. It's as iconic as a Stevie Ray Vaughan guitar. When you see SRV's guitar, you think, oh, that's SRV. When you think about those drum parts, it's almost like a code between drummers. Like, hey man, can you play YYZ? It's that, right? And I only can because I can read music really well, so I can read it through. I can play it. I've done a Rush cover and I just read it through because it's just too much. I ain't got time to sit down and learn all that stuff by ear. You know what I mean? One of the things he does that I like when I listen to it again is like, oh, there's a thing that I've stolen for the last 25 years, where like he'll do like a. Oh boy, we're going to get in there. Do like 4 30-second notes off of the and brow, right? Not do it as a double stroke, but do it as a single. There's so much stuff in there that if we drummers ever had to pay like copyright on drum parts, we'd all be broke, son. Like there's so much stuff in YYZ that every drummer something else about it. They're the most iconic ride cymbal part. Boy, we're going to go nerdy. All you non-musicians, I apologize. But the 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1, that ride cymbal part, right? That ride pattern comes around a lot in the Rush oeuvre. You will hear that very iconic 1 and a 2 and 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a, yeah, that's pattern, right? If you can learn that pattern, you've learned about 10, 12 sections of Rush songs, maybe more even. That's a calling card, and you'll hear people do it. You'll hear people do it like, oh, there's the Neil ride bell pattern, because he never does it on the hi-hat. It's always on the ride cymbal. That's just so much iconic stuff that, like, Neil has been able to allow us lesser mortals steal from him and make us better because we got decent on our instrument enough to like steal his stuff. That's a big thing that I think of when I think of YYZ.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when I first was really getting into Moving Pictures, which it's weird, like I was just realizing the other day that I didn't fully listen to Moving Pictures until 2007 when Snakes and Arrows was getting ready to come out.
Okay.
I had been listening to Rush. I had already gone to a concert. I went to their R30 concert and I had been listening to a bunch of their stuff all the way through, but I was a Permanent Waves guy and a Signals guy. And I just, for whatever reason, just missed that. But then I listened to YYZ for the first time, and I just from the very start of it, I was like, oh, something is about to happen. And then it came in, and then it was, because this was before I really knew anything about drums. And so I was like, the drums don't sound that complicated. Like, what's going on? It just sounds simple. And then I like looked up a video of him playing, and I was like, there's nothing fancy going on until like the middle part. It's
perfection. It's just perfection of it. It's the perfection of it. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that, like, non-musicians is going to sound pretentious as shit, but it's true. If you are a literate drummer and competent on your instrument, you can understand everything Neil does. like there's stuff that like Danny Carey is the one for me that's beyond understanding. There's just things that he does in polyrhythmically that I do not understand, which is one of the reasons I like listening to Tool, because I can turn off my analytical brain because I can't understand a lot of what's going on. Neil didn't play a whole lot of advanced like Frank Zappa polyrhythmic type stuff. He wasn't doing a lot of fives and sevens and playing like a quarter note triplet and splitting up each quarter note triplet into a 5 and a 6 and a 7, like you would think of like the Black Page by Frank Zappa, right? So you're right about that. And it's okay. Comment section, settle down. Settle down. Because a lot of times, like, citizens, which is what I call non-musicians, like citizens or non-musicians, like because citizens only hear like what's on the radio and then they see Neil. Well, comparatively, that's like James Joyce compared to, AC/DC. And I love both of those things equally, right? So a lot of citizens think of Neil a little more than they should if they had some literacy about what's going on. You're absolutely right. Dude, I mean, this is no way to disparage this track that we're putting over to the moon, but I've had 15-year-olds play YYZ at recitals. Mm-hmm. Now, this 15-year-old was an outstanding, atypical 15-year-old. But, 15-year-old played it. He's really good. And he practices his ass off to get there, but it's not impossible. It's not learning Mandarin in an hour. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that. You're absolutely right about that. And that's something that I think a lot of drummers once, and I realized this too when I was a kid, just listening to it and just thinking it's just like, it's just insurmountable drumming. But when you get literate, then you learn what the genius of it is the way it's put together and the thought behind everything. Because, I mean, honestly, dude, he played 16th notes, 32nd notes, sextuplets. Maybe you can find some quintuplets in there, groupings of 16ths and 5s, but nothing like what you're hearing from Prog now and what I call YouTube shredders. It's not even the same ballpark. It's, we talked about it in the last one. It's a whole different kind of warfare that Prog guys are doing right now. Yeah. But I think that's the reason why Neil's so great, because it's still complicated, but it's not you have to be this tall to ride this ride. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's still inviting. It's still complicated. La Via Strangiato is still one of the most possibly hard songs to play, and so is Tom Sawyer, and so is so many of them. But man, I'm decent at the drums. I'm aggressively mediocre, and I was able, I've played Rush parts, you know what I'm saying? I've learned Rush songs, like, so what you're talking about there is absolutely true. And man, this is why I say anonymous on YouTube, because there's people that want to like find me after saying this, but I mean this in the most respectful way. He used the same rhythms and subdivisions, as the rest of us did, but he just did it better. He had better choices of combinations. It's composite. 3 words when you think about Neil. It's composition, it's composition, and it's composition. It's perfection. He said in an interview where he was talking about, after those tragedies that happened to him, which was just so sad, he had to ask himself, like, can I sit down and obsess over a drum part after all these horrid tragedies, right? Mm-hmm. His wife and daughter. And can I still sit down and compose? And, like, that was him, like, admitting, like, I have to obsess over these things. These are things that are I'm a woodworker. So, like, every right angle is perfectly 90 degrees, right? Every miter joint fit. You can't put a piece of hair between those two joints, right? It's just all perfection. And there's so many progressive musicians that need to chill the F out and listen to Rush more and get more melodic, and you'll be more famous because people will like it because you're already so good. But man, like, dude, like that one Dream Theater instrumental, like, scenes from Metropolis Part 2 or something. Actually, that same kid who played YYZ at 15 played that song as his senior recital, his senior high school recital for me. It's got like 79 time signature changes, and it's like a panic attack. Like listening to that, it's like listening to a panic attack happen. There's nothing like loving to the listener. It's just a battle axe to your head, to your cerebellum. It's terrible to listen to. And I know there's going to be Dream Theater fans that listen to this, but those prog bands need to go back and listen to Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer, one of the most difficult drum parts to play. You'll sing that tonight. You know, when I say Tom Petty, or it's not Tom Petty, when I say Tom Sawyer, Tom Petty's amazing too. When I say Tom Sawyer, Adam right now is singing those lines. You know what I mean? And you're thinking, right? Those things last. They last. Classics are classics for a reason. You know what I mean? And that's what Rush did. Rush had this, they walked this tightrope of virtuosity and chops, but also melodies and harmonies. And I know they didn't sing harmonies, but melodic lines that will forever be in your head and will last forever. And that's why they will last. They're not going to last because Neil could play fast, or that Neil could play in 7, or that Geddy could, sing complicated lyrics and play complicated bass parts. They're going to, forgot about Alex. See what happens, right? Forgot about Alex. They're not going to last because of their virtuosity. They're going to last because of the sounds they made together at the same time. Yeah. And that's what I wish more progressive musicians would. You know who does it well? Pineapple Thief. Pineapple Thief is a prog band that has Gavin Harrison in the drum seat. That is the closest thing. I think a lot of people out there would maybe say Porcupine Tree, but I think Pineapple Thief is the closest band that walks that same line of complication, but great songs. Mm-hmm. You can do both. Those two things can exist, and Rush was geniuses at it. So that's a big long rant. I'm sorry. Oh, no, I haven't got to talk about Rush in a long time. I can't do any more Rush videos on my channel because I've done like 3. I've done 4 if you include. I reacted to the Ohio State University's Rush tribute. I actually talked to the writer. That writer of the drum parts got hold of me, and I talked to him, and cool. I really got my chance to be like, wow, you really did this man justice. And man, you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
I did a weepy Neil Peart memorial, and I promised myself I wasn't going to get weepy on my channel. But the older I get, the softer I get. And when they made Neil on, you're not going to get me to break down on YouTube again. I'm not going to. And it hit so hard. And just think about that. Think about how iconic that is. We're grown men with families and children and jobs, and we got choked up from a bunch of college kids making Neil's shape on a football field. What other person could do that to you? You know what I mean? How great is that? And we're doing this a few days after, unfortunately, the memorial of I don't want to bring the pod down, but of his unfortunate and untimely death. And hopefully we have honored the man well today, because man, I wouldn't be doing this. I don't know if I should be mad at him or not for, making me want to become a musician, but I wouldn't be one if it wasn't for him. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's so, they're just gigantic. They're just big. They're just bigger than life.
Yeah. And there's just so many things about what they did lyrically, what they did in support of those lyrics with their music, that there just is no other band like it. They pull you in and they change people's lives, which sounds silly to the outsider, but once you get in there and you have your Red Sector A moment where like it hits you and you're like, wait, these are real people. Like this is real stuff that we're talking about. We aren't talking about love. We aren't talking about just going out and getting laid. We're talking about real events that really matter. And where do I stand on all this? And it really gets you asking questions. And I love that the music is in support of that. It doesn't detract away, which I think is what you're talking about with all these prog epics, that they throw a ton of notes at you, and then you're like, you get to the end, you're like, I don't even know what happened lyrically.
None of that meant anything.
Exactly. But what they do so well, and this is a pet peeve of mine when people try to break it down and say, well, what Neil did wasn't such a big deal because anyone can play it. It's like, well, the point isn't that anyone can play it. The point is that he came up with it.
That's the thing. Anybody can color over a painting. Anybody can, anybody can trace, you know what I'm saying? But like, can you come up with that part? Can you be the composer? And it's one of the things that I am not running that React channel. And it's not just React channel. I also do music commentary as well, which is something new that I've kind of added in. Because honestly, man, I've done like 140 React videos. There's not so much more I can do. And again, when I say React videos, I'm not like lost in Vegas. I'm not like, it's like I'm actually analyzing them. I use React for the algorithm. If you watch any of my videos, it's an educational tool. I am doing what I've been doing in lessons for years, because the how isn't really that interesting to me, because anybody that has persistence and ambition can get good at something. It's the why that something is done. And that's what my channel's about, right? And my very first video was doing Tom Sawyer, knowing that I was going to get a DMCA claim. But if you're going to do a channel, you have to do Neil, right? And I've done Neil, I've done Tom Sawyer, I've done his drum solo because I wouldn't get DMCA claimed on his solo, the one where he actually quotes, it's in 3/4 Beato. It's the one where he kind of quotes the Drum Also Waltzes. I can't remember what tour that one was from. Oh, it was from the Roll the Bones tour, a tour that I saw. That's why I use it, because I saw that tour.
Oh.
And I don't have the excuse of being an old man, because I was a young man then, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "Why are you crying? He's playing a drum solo." I was like, "You don't understand." Because I'd never, it's the first time I'd seen him. Like the Roll the Bones tour was the first time I saw him play. And he played that solo. And the solo, again, going back, is always usually in YYZ, right? So, I don't know, from the live experience, YYZ is really just foreplay for the drum solo, because you know that you're going to get the drum solo in YYZ, right? So that's what YYZ is from a live, experience, is like, get this over with. Let's get to that drum solo, right? And then, they'll bring in that last section after the solo. He did that in Show of Hands. That was a big one for me. It was, I took my VCR machine up this hill that was near my house and hooked it up to another guy's VCR machine and dubbed Hold Your Fire. No, Show of Hands, which was the Hold Your Fire tour, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, yeah.
Right. And man, I listened to YYZ in that drum solo, dude. That the cowbell part. And again, that's a melody. Like what I just sang there, off key because I can't sing. That's a melody. Everything that Neil was doing, he was going for melodic effect and he was going for compositional effect, and everything was there to serve the song. And yes, he was playing pretty complicated stuff. But he never really played like double bass in grooves. He never did. Like his double bass was for drum fill things, right? He never. I could be wrong because I don't know the complete discography. I'm sorry, Rush fans. But, there's not like a dooka pop, double bass thing in any Rush song. The double bass is there for drum fill flavor. But everything, even when it was complicated, even when it was something as simple as, say, like Ghost of a Chance, it was all to serve the song. Neil serves. That's what he did. And that's what he did his whole life. And, he was always the new guy, right? Neil was always the new guy. He was the new guy 40 years in. And if you know anything about the back stage of those cats, Neil was kind of a loner. Like Neil didn't do press really. He would do modern drummer interviews. If you go on YouTube, there's very few interviews. Neil was not. He's Canadian, right? He just wanted to play his drums and then go home and I think he made wine too and ride his motorcycle. And he was not interested in the trappings of fame. Even at when you think of like when they would become icons 30, 40 years in, Neil could probably still walk a lot of places and not be noticed.
Yeah.
Geddy goes anywhere.
Instant.
That's Geddy, right? Geddy and Alex was always the face of the band, interviewing, especially after the tragedy. Neil really went out, retreated from the spotlight. He never did any kind of press, none of that stuff. And he was just kind of a private dude and just a thoughtful, he's the thoughtful professor. And he was just only cared about the art he was making. He didn't care about anything else, man. And what a great life that he got to lead. And to know that like he influenced millions. If you think about the world, millions of people. Like you see, was it R40s from Brazil or is it R30?
It was oh gosh.
Is it
Russian
Russian Rio, that one?
Yeah, Russian Rio.
80,000 soccer hooligans singing YYZ. You can't even hear the band. Yeah. What other instrumental would do that, would hit like that on a whole other continent and to people who don't even speak English, singing YYZ? And not to bring just a stereotypical trope, it's this universal thing. It's this universal language. That moment, man, how we not bring that up? That moment in Russian Rio, when everybody's da 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 da, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and in this world that we live in right now, where everything's so. Try not to cuss at them, so your editor doesn't have to go in and put in beeps. Where everything is so separated and polarized. How great is it that like I'm from Appalachia, you're from Dallas. We could go to Rio and we'd be loved because we love that stuff too. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They wouldn't care who we are, what we are, where we come from. We're all Rush fans, and we can on this and this like great bringing together. We need more of that. We probably need Rush more than ever right now. You know what I mean? Like this, they bring together everything. Every classical guys love them. Rock dudes love them. People who listen to hip hop love them. They've been sampled in hip hop songs. You know what I mean? They're the impossibly universal band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and. I mean, with that, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
Man, I've had a lot of fun,
Super
Adam.
Appreciate your willingness to come and chat and geek out on this. But so final thoughts about YYZ, and if you had to only pick one of these two tracks to keep and the other one had to disappear, which
it's so hard because, man, I'm so big fan of Leave That Thing Alone now, but I think it might be recency bias because it was just a fresh, because honestly, I hadn't listened to Counterparts, in a long time. There's a few records that I just always listen to from Rush, like Presto. I know. Presto is my record. I love that record, top to bottom. And man, Superconductor's a good song. That's a great song. I don't care. Anagram for Mongo, great song. Everything's great on that. So Presto, always go back to. Grace Under Pressure, always go back to. Moving Pictures, because I digested it so much. It's like a salad with ranch dressing, right? I've had it so much. But then you can't make YYZ go away because it's a Mount Rushmore instrumental. I'm going to say right.
Pick if you have.
I'm going to say nah. I'm going to do it. I'm going to say right now in 2022, but it's a caveat because YYZ is. I've heard it so many times that really, like, if tomorrow I wanted to listen to a Rush instrumental, I'm probably going to listen to Leave That Thing Alone.
Okay.
because I know
Yeah.
YYZ's in my DNA. Like I could sweat that song. It's in me, but it's such a fresh track for me because it's been a long time and I've been listening to Counterparts actually since thank you so much for like reintroducing Counterparts to me because I forgot how Animate's such a good song. Like that whole record just so tight from top to bottom. But yeah, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be that dude, and I'm not doing a hipster thing at all. And I like this hipster hat, glasses, but I'm not. For me, and only because YYZ is such a, I've heard it 1,000 times. I'm gonna go leave that thing alone because it's such a great song. But you can't go wrong. You know, it's 1A, 1B. You know what I'm saying? No one's going to be mad at you for playing either one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's the whole point of this podcast is we want opinions. We don't want trying to insert objectivity into this because music is an art and there's nothing objective about art. It's all subjective. And so being able to talk about our differences and be able to appreciate that everybody doesn't agree on what's the best and what's the worst, that best and worst shouldn't even be topics of discussion. That's what we're looking for. And super appreciate your time, super appreciate your insights. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Anytime, brother. This is so much fun. Anytime I get to like nerd out with another Rush fan, I'll be there. You just call. It's gonna be no problem. Man, I thank you. It was an honor to get to come on here and talk about something I love so much and something that I've loved since I was 13. I'm 44 and I've loved them since I was a 13-year-old. And what things in your life last that long? Like maybe your favorite football team and Rush. You know what I mean? And when I shuffle off, I'll probably get that Rush casket. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. They should sell that in the merch store.
Oh, dude, you know how many? Oh, man. Gene Simmons will sign off for it. Like Gene Simmons will sell that for them. That's no problem. But man, Adam, you and your wife, thank you, Julianne. Thank you all for having me. And anytime y'all want to talk about Neil, man, just call.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And we'll catch you later.
Thank you, brother.